Good day, students, and welcome to lesson number 3 for oral communication. And this time we are going to discuss the barriers of communication and intercultural communication. So, proceeding into our objectives for this lesson, at the end of the learning unit, we will characterize the different barriers of communication, also provide their definition. We will expound on the significance of intercultural communication in the modern times, and as part of your assessment, we will suggest ways to avoid communication breakdown. And in so doing, we are going to talk about the following topics for today. We have barriers of communication and, of course, intercultural communication. Both things are very, very important, especially in the modern times. So let's go to the first topic, which is the barriers of communication. Now, since communication is something that exists between people, it's a normal event. It's a regular occurrence from day to day, and it does not happen inside a bubble. So because of that, chances are there are factors which may impede, which may affect, which may hamper the success of the communication process. And I'm sure that many of you have encountered an experience wherein either you were unable to get your message across, or the other way around. It was you who found it difficult to understand or comprehend a certain message because there were some factors which prevented you from doing so. And it is that specific experience that I would like to focus on, because that is what Shannon and Weaver, as we discussed in the previous lesson, that is what they referred to as noise. But in the context of this lesson, we are going to use a different terminology. We are going to call it as a barrier. Okay, so what are the barriers of communication? Well, there are 7 common barriers to communication as stipulated in Impact Factory. We have physical barriers, we have perceptual barriers, we have emotional barriers, cultural barriers, language barriers, gender barriers, and last but definitely not the least, we have interpersonal barriers. Let's discuss the first one. Physical barriers are found in your direct environment, and they are the physical structures which prevent you, or which may affect the communication of one person to another, or one group to another. Allow me to give you an example, or allow me to give you examples. First one, closed doors in offices will prevent communication. Most likely, if you see a closed door, that is going to tell you that this person does not want to be disturbed. Or probably, you'd have to ask permission for you to be granted access inside, or to the inside of that room. They have a thing they call open door policy, but even with an open door policy, most of the important offices inside a company remain closed until you knock. Okay. Second, high cubicles. Sometimes in call centers you have high cubicles, and those high cubicles actually perform 2 tasks. One is probably to disallow employees from communicating with one another, which it actually does. It prevents you from talking to one another. Second is also to dampen the noise. As you know, an office jam-packed with people can get a bit noisy, and the high cubicles help to funnel the sound upward, so it does not disperse into the operations floor. And then finally, this is one very common example. Even new students can relate to this. Loud music inside a public transport will affect how will you hear the person you're talking to on the phone? Especially if you're sitting near the speakers. When the speakers are blasting out very loud music, it's very difficult for you to understand the person on the other line. Or the other person might also find it difficult to hear what you're actually saying because all they hear on the phone would be the blaring music. So those are examples of physical barriers, structures or factors found in the physical environment which affect the success of communication. The second one is perceptual barrier. Now, this one is not found in the physical environment. Instead, this is something that is a little bit more innate or intrinsic. These refer to the differences in the outlooks and the perceptions of the interlocutors or the communicators, which may lead to a difference in opinions. And this is not something that is outright seen. Okay, so this is what we would like to call as tension between two people. For example, you have a discussion between individuals. One is supporting a politician. The other one is just flat out opposing him. When these two people meet or talk about that particular politician, there might be a little bit of friction occurring between these two. Or it is possible that when one person is talking or is saying good things about this person, the other person might not be very receptive to those arguments because, again, there is a perceptual barrier. I don't want to listen to you because we don't share the same thoughts or the same sentiments. This is also true for debaters or debates about the flat earth and the round earth movement. Flat earth people just don't want to listen to the round earth people and vice versa. Okay? Yes, they might give an opportunity for either side to give their arguments, but at the end of the day, they're just not having it. And lastly, this one is a little bit more up your avenue. Parents and children may be on different terms when talking about teenage relationships. I've seen numerous encounters like this. Parents say no, child wants to have or to engage in a teenage relationship, but either side just won't listen. The parents want to explain their side, why they don't want to allow their children to engage in teenage relationships, but the children won't listen. Or it could be the other way around. The children are trying to convince their parents that I'm responsible enough to handle a relationship, but the parents are not considering it because in their eyes, to their perception, the child is still unable to do so. Okay, so those are examples of perceptual barriers. Next, we have emotional barriers. This is quite common because, well, as you know, we are emotional beings. Okay? At some point in our lives, we have felt emotions. We have felt feelings. And sometimes these feelings also influence how much we communicate with another person or how much communication we welcome. First, okay, as an example, you may experience difficulty in reaching out to a person who is mad at you. You're trying to explain, but no. Don't talk to me or talk to the hand. Okay. There is no communication there. Okay. No successful communication is there because of the emotional barrier. There is an intense emotion currently existing in one person. Therefore, he or she does not want to talk about that. Next, when you and your parents argue, I think this has something to do with the situation in the previous slide. Okay, so in conjugation, once you do engage in an argument, sometimes you storm out of the room, you bang the door, you don't want to listen to them, all because you are emotionally distraught or emotionally bothered or frustrated, and that's fine. Your initial feelings are most likely valid, but again, we all need some time to let off some steam. And when all of those negative emotions have been let out, then that's the time that we can begin to discuss the proposition or whatever it is that you were trying to talk about. So we can't have hotheads discussing a topic, because at the end of the day, nothing gets resolved. Next, we have cultural barriers. I think this one is resonant with current events. Okay? In our dealings with others, there are situations wherein we encounter people who come from a different cultural background or who come from a different race altogether. And this difference in cultural practices may be an avenue for miscommunication. Okay? One person means one thing, it was interpreted in a different way. Some examples. In some cultures, in some countries, burping after you eat means that you have enjoyed the meal. For some other cultures, burping is considered rude. Okay? That's why we have to determine the cultural backgrounds of a country before we even try to visit. That's one suggestion that is very helpful, I think, for tourists to get to know the cultural practices or the common cultural practices in that country, so as to not be culturally shocked when they get there. Okay, second example. This one has something to do with Asians. In some Asian cultures, when you slurp noodles or when you clink your utensils, that is actually considered acceptable, or those practices are considered acceptable. In some other countries, they prefer to eat in silence, and slurping is actually rude. But for some, they believe that the clinking of utensils help shoo the bad spirits or the bad energies away. And we have to respect that. Even if personally we think that it is rude, ultimately we have to respect the culture of other people. And I think that when I say that this is resonant with current events, there has been a movement lately. Actually, there have been lots of movements. We have Black Lives Matter and we have Stop Asian Hate. And I think those things stem from a shallow understanding of cultural backgrounds and the stubbornness of people to accept that there are people from all walks of life and from other countries who actually deserve the right to live like the rest of us. Okay, so all lives are equal. All people are equal, no matter the color of your skin or no matter the cultural practices that you observe. All right. Next, we have language barriers. Now, language barriers pretty much they're self-explanatory. These are differences in language which occur between two people who come from different countries or different regions. However, in the case of the Philippines, it might not actually be a general language barrier, but more of a dialectic barrier. Because the Philippines, geographically, we are an archipelago, which means several masses of land are separated by water. And because the land mass is separate, there is the possibility that there's a different language spoken in one area and another language spoken in one area, despite the fact that only a single body of water is between them. That's possible. So it does not only mean that language barriers exist between people of different countries, like one from the Philippines and one from the US, or one from India, one from Japan. No. It can also exist between two people who do not share a common tongue. For example, one person speaks Cebuano, the other person speaks Ilonggo. Yes, there might be common terms, but again, there are certain terminologies in Ilonggo which mean a different thing in Cebuano. The same thing for Tagalog. If we speak certain words in Cebuano, they might have a different meaning when translated into Tagalog or when understood from a Tagalog point of view. So this can also affect the success of communication, language barriers. If you don't know the language of the other person, then you're forced to resort to other things. So I'll give you an example. Some candidates of the Miss Universe pageant make use of an interpreter. Why? Because they're not very comfortable in using English as a a means to respond to the question. And they're not forced to use English, so they can use their mother tongue. And that's where the interpreter comes in. So that's a language barrier. They need the interpreter for them to understand the question, and they need the interpreter for them to get their message across. Without the interpreter, communication is unsuccessful. This one happened in real life. During the Cold War, Nikita Khrushchev made a statement to the Americans, and it was loosely translated into "We will bury you." And you know, during the Cold War, the nuclear arms race was great, and the Americans thought that that was a threat, when in fact the most accurate translation of Khrushchev was "We will overtake you." Okay, you will no longer be the leader. Instead, we will be the leading. We will be the one in the lead. So things like these, okay, often pose a great problem, especially when it is on a scale as large as one country and another country having disputes over nuclear arms. So again, language barriers, and these are your examples. Next, we have gender barriers. Okay, so as men and women develop differently, we have to admit that there are differences between the speech patterns of men and women. So there are also non-verbal patterns which are different from men and women. So it is said, scientifically speaking, that when men speak, they use only the left side of their brain, while women use both hemispheres. Women tend to include emotions into the statement, whereas men, not generalizing here, but the tendency would be to state an idea in a straight up sentence, a very short sentence. I'm not saying all men are men of few words, but we tend to disregard the emotional aspect and then just state the idea for what it is. Now, there are also instances wherein communicating a concept is only appropriate between certain groups of people, such as girl talk or the bro code. Guys are not always welcome to girl talks, and girls are not always welcome when there's the bro code involved. So I'll give you some examples. Men and women are considered different because men talk less or in shorter sentences than women. Women tend to use longer sentences than the men. The second example would be something that is quite unconscious for men, but we do it. Especially when we meet other guys that we know along the street, along the corridors, we do this. And this nod right here is actually a message like, hey, or sup. And we don't have to say anything. We just do this. The women don't. The women usually say words like, hi, or they give a kiss on the cheek and all that. Guys, we just do this. And we know, okay? We acknowledge each other's presence. So, gender barriers. If you were to do this to a lady, she might have a different interpretation than if you were doing that to a guy. Or if a girl were to approach you, a random girl were to approach you, gives you a kiss on the cheek, that would be a different interpretation to you. But if it were to happen to another lady, then it might have a different interpretation from their point of view. So, again, difference in gender. And then finally, we have interpersonal barriers. So interpersonal barriers, they don't have anything to do with the speech patterns or whatnot. No physical environment, nothing. Interpersonal barriers are focused on the attitude of a person, regardless of gender, of culture, of social status. This one is more of their personal preferences or their behavior. There are 6 kinds of interpersonal barriers. We have withdrawal, when a person refuses to interact. We have rituals. These are unspoken practices between two people, but when they do it, they know why they're doing it and they know the meaning behind the ritual. We have games, pastimes, work, and closeness. Okay, so these are things, these are behaviors which can affect the success of communication. Allow me to give you an example. A child refuses to go out and talk to his parents because he is, sorry, this is mad at them. Okay, so he or she is mad at them. So there is an emotional component, okay, an emotional barrier, and therefore the child withdraws from the communication process. Does not involve himself or herself in the conversation. Or another example, co-workers do not talk to each other in the office as they are preoccupied with work. So because you are fixated on one activity, then it prevents you from engaging in in a conversation with another person. So those are interpersonal barriers. So now that we have discussed how people can be divided in terms of communication, let's try and bridge the gap. Let's look at one aspect where we can create bridges. And this has something to do with intercultural communication. In the global setup, the world has been made smaller with the presence of technology. You need to communicate with someone from the other side of the globe. All you need to do is turn on your computers, your phones, access the internet, and send them a message, an email, go to social media. It's that easy. And because the world has become a smaller place, people are now zoomed in. Okay? They're more aware. But even with all that awareness, we seem to forget that these people deserve respect. We, in the same way that we demand respect from them. And because that is so, we have to make sure that when we do get the chance to communicate with people, from outside our country, outside our place, that we have to respect where they come from. We have to respect their roots, and this is what we call intercultural communication: the ability to communicate with other people who come from a different country or from a different race or even social groups. Okay, we do not ostracize people just because they have a different point of view from us. Okay, especially now when there are so many political factions, there are so many social factions, that we forget that at the end of the day, when we are stripped of all these groups, these loyalties, we are people. Other than the color of our skin, color of our eyes, whether we're tall, short, dark, chubby, thin, we're all people. We have to respect that fact, and we have to keep in mind that underneath all that, us people need to be able to respect each other. So, compromise and adjust, and know that it is when we begin to build bridges that this world, separated by so many different bodies of water, ideologies, other things that separate countries, respect is the bridge that connects us all. And in the words of Mufasa, we are all connected in the great circle of life. And so with that, we end our lesson for today. And should you have any other questions, or if you want to do advanced reading, there are references which I have included. You can read more about the barriers of communication and intercultural communication from these references. And with that, this has been Sir Dardar, wishing you a great day. Thank you very much for watching the video and for listening to our discussion. I'll see you in the next video. Toodles.